Ambassador Zethkar of the Galactic Council straightened his forearms as the human delegation entered the grand chamber. The massive crystalline dome above them sparkled with the light of 1,000 stars, each representing a member species of the Council. Today marked humanity's formal presentation for full membership, a process that typically took centuries, but had been fast-tracked due to their remarkable technological contributions. The humans walked with an odd confidence that made Zethkar's scales ripple with unease. Unlike other species who approached the Council with reverence and barely contained fear, these bipedal mammals seemed almost amused. Their leader, a female called Ambassador Chen, wore a simple black uniform that stood out starkly against the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor of the other delegates. "Honored Council," Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber without any amplification device. "We thank you for this opportunity to present humanity's case for full membership in your esteemed organization." Zethkar exchanged glances with his colleague, Representative Vorth of the Crystalline Collective. In 3,000 years of council proceedings, no species had ever declined the traditional neural broadcasting equipment that allowed thoughts to be shared directly between minds. The humans insisted on using their primitive vocal communication exclusively. "The honor is ours, Ambassador Chen," Zethkar replied, his translator converting his harmonic frequencies into human language. "Your species has shown remarkable progress in the mere 200 years since first contact. Your medical technologies have revolutionized healing across 17 star systems, and your engineering solutions have solved problems that plagued us for millennia." Chen smiled, an expression that still unsettled many council members. The baring of teeth was considered aggressive by most galactic species, yet humans seemed to use it to convey pleasure. "We're happy to contribute to the galactic community's well-being. However, before we proceed with the membership ceremony, there's something important we need to discuss." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. The ritual was ancient and sacred. No species had ever requested modifications to the sacred proceedings. "We have not been entirely honest with you about our nature," Chen continued, her tone remaining pleasant despite the gravity of her words. "When we first made contact with your scout ships 2 centuries ago, we made a collective decision to, how should I put this, present ourselves in a more palatable manner." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Zethkar's breathing passages constricted as primal fear responses activated throughout his nervous system. Around the chamber, similar reactions played out across dozens of species. The Vorthak delegates' crystalline structure began to dim, while the gaseous nebula representatives started to swirl more rapidly in their containment suits. "What exactly are you suggesting, Ambassador?" Vorth's translated voice carried harmonics of suspicion and growing alarm. Chen's smile never wavered. "We're suggesting that the humanity you've come to know represents our species at its most restrained. You see, we realized early on that our true nature might be somewhat overwhelming for a galaxy that has enjoyed peace for the last 10,000 years. She gestured to her fellow delegates who stood with the same unsettling calm. "The humans you've interacted with have all been specially selected and trained individuals. Scientists, diplomats, engineers, medical professionals. They represent the best of our civilized society, but they are not representative of our species as a whole." The massive Gorlax representative, whose species prided itself on being the galaxy's premier warriors, leaned forward with interest. "You speak in riddles, small mammal. If your diplomats and scientists are not your strongest, then what are you hiding?" "Oh, they are our strongest," Chen replied, her tone conversational, "in their respective fields, but you asked the wrong question. You should have asked what happens when we stop trying to be civilized." She touched a device on her wrist, and suddenly the air in the chamber filled with holographic displays. Images of human history began to play out above their heads. Ancient battles where humans fought with crude metal weapons, medieval sieges where they catapulted diseased corpses over city walls, industrial wars where they gassed each other with chemical weapons. "These are historical records," Chen explained as the images continued to cycle through humanity's violent past. "For most of our evolution, we were apex predators on a death world. Our planet was so hostile that we developed the ability to run down any prey over long distances, to survive on minimal resources, and to fight each other continuously for territory and resources. The chamber erupted in shocked vocalizations as the images shifted to more recent conflicts. Nuclear explosions, orbital bombardments, antimatter weapons deployed against human cities by other humans. "This is your own species," Vorth whispered, his crystalline form flickering with disbelief. "You war against yourselves?" "Constantly," Chen confirmed cheerfully. "Even now, as we speak to you, there are approximately 47 active conflicts occurring across human space. We've been fighting each other for so long that we've turned warfare into an art form. We study it, perfect it, and teach it to our children." She paused the display on an image of human soldiers in powered armor, their faces hidden behind helmets designed to intimidate. "These are our peacekeepers, the humans we send to resolve conflicts. Notice how even our peace-bringing forces are designed for war?" Zethkar felt his secondary hearts begin to race. You're telling us that your entire species are warriors? Warriors, survivors, apex predators, who climb to the top of our food chain by being more vicious than anything else on our world," Chen agreed. "And then when we ran out of things to hunt, we turned that same energy toward hunting each other. We've been doing it for so long that we've never known true peace." The chamber had fallen silent except for the translation equipment and the nervous sounds of various species' stress responses. Chen looked around at the assembled delegates with that same pleasant smile. "But here's the truly remarkable part," she continued. "Despite all of this, despite being born killers on a world that tried to kill us every day, we chose to become something better. The humans you've met over the past 2 centuries, they represent what we became when we decided to use our natural talents for creation instead of destruction." She gestured to the images still hovering in the air. "Every single one of these capabilities, this capacity for violence and survival, we've redirected toward protecting and building instead of conquering and destroying. When your medical teams couldn't solve a plague, we solved it because we understand death better than anyone. When your engineering projects failed, we succeeded because we've spent millennia finding ways to survive in impossible situations." The implications began to sink in across the chamber, and Zethkar realized that everything was about to change. The silence stretched for long moments before High Chancellor Mordeth of the Ethereal Dominion finally spoke. His species had held leadership positions in the Council for over 5 millennia, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority when it resonated through the chamber's neural networks. "Ambassador Chen, are you telling this council that humanity has been deliberately deceiving us for 2 centuries? The accusation hung heavy in the recycled air of the station. Chen's expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious but retaining that underlying confidence that had unsettled the delegates from the beginning. "Not deceiving, Chancellor. We prefer to think of it as careful introduction. Consider it a kindness." The Vorthak delegates' crystalline form pulsed with rapid light patterns, their species equivalent of agitated breathing. "Kindness? You admit to being a species of predators and warriors, and you call deception a kindness? Representative Vorth, let me ask you something," Chen replied, turning to face the crystalline being directly. "When was the last time your species experienced an existential threat? When did you last face the possibility of complete extinction?" The crystal being's light patterns slowed as they processed the question. "The Great Cooling occurred approximately 12,000 years ago. Our homeworld star began to dim, and we had to evacuate to preserve our species. And how did your people respond to this crisis?" We requested assistance from the Council. The Gorlax provided transportation, the Nebula Collective offered temporary housing in their gas giant habitats, and the Zephyrians terraformed 3 worlds for our eventual settlement." Chen nodded, then turned to address the entire chamber. "Honorable delegates, this perfectly illustrates why we chose to reveal ourselves gradually. Your species, all of your species, have grown accustomed to cooperation, to requesting help when faced with challenges, to working together for mutual benefit. This is admirable. This is beautiful. This is also completely alien to human psychology." She activated another holographic display, this one showing a human colony ship emerging from hyperspace into an empty star system. "When humanity faced potential extinction due to resource depletion on Earth, we didn't ask for help. We didn't even know anyone existed who could help. We simply spread out across the galaxy, terraforming hostile worlds and establishing colonies in places where no sane species would attempt to live. The image shifted to show humans in environmental suits working on an airless moon, building structures in the shadow of an active volcano. We chose to colonize worlds that were actively trying to kill us because that felt normal to us. Comfortable, even. Gorlak's war leader Thakmor, whose massive frame dominated one section of the chamber, rumbled with what might have been approval or concern. Your species colonizes death worlds. Voluntarily? Exclusively, Chen confirmed. Every human colony exists on what the galactic standard classifies as a Class 9 or higher death world. We find planets with toxic atmospheres, extreme weather, dangerous wildlife, or active geological instability, and we build thriving cities there. Our children grow up playing in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes. She touched her wrist device again, and the display changed to show human children running through what appeared to be a crystalline forest. Beautiful. Until the observers realized that the children were wearing no protective equipment while surrounded by obviously radioactive formations. This is a playground on New Chernobyl, one of our more popular family colonies, Chen explained casually. The background radiation is just enough to give our children a healthy glow and strengthen their immune systems. A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. The radiation levels visible in the readings would be lethal to most species within hours. Chancellor Mordeth's ethereal form flickered with distress patterns. How is this possible? How does your species survive such conditions? Evolution, Chancellor. Natural selection on a world that spent millions of years trying to kill us. We developed immunity to most toxins, resistance to radiation, the ability to survive in extreme temperatures, and regenerative capabilities that most species would consider miraculous. But more importantly, we developed the psychological traits necessary to thrive in hostile environments. Chen's smile returned, but this time it carried an edge that made several delegates instinctively step backward. We don't just survive in impossible situations. We excel in them. Crisis brings out the best in humanity because crisis is our natural state. When your medical teams encountered that plague on Xerion Prime and couldn't develop a cure, we had one ready within 6 hours. How? Whispered Representative Vorth, his curiosity overcoming his fear. Because we've been fighting plagues for our entire evolutionary history. Our bodies are walking laboratories of immune responses to diseases that don't exist anywhere else in the galaxy. When we encounter a new pathogen, we don't run computer simulations or hold committee meetings to discuss treatment options. We isolate the problem, throw every weapon in our biological arsenal at it, and we adapt. Usually within hours. The implication was staggering. Zethkar found his translator struggling to process his thoughts into coherent speech. You're saying that your medical advances aren't the result of superior technology, but of superior evolution for surviving diseases. Exactly. And our engineering solutions aren't the product of advanced theoretical knowledge. They're the result of 10,000 years of building things in environments where failure means death. When your space elevators kept collapsing due to stellar wind interactions, we solved it in 3 days because we've been building structures that can withstand hurricanes, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions since before we discovered agriculture. Chen walked closer to the center of the chamber, and several delegates unconsciously moved away from her. The subtle predatory grace in her movements was becoming more apparent as the conversation continued. Every problem you've presented to us over the past 2 centuries has been something we've already faced and overcome. Not because we're smarter than you, but because we've been forced to become very, very good at surviving things that should have killed us. She stopped walking and faced the High Chancellor directly. We revealed our nature gradually because we wanted you to understand that we're not just warriors or predators. We're survivors who chose to become protectors. We're killers who decided to become healers. We're a species that could have conquered the galaxy through force, but instead chose to join it through friendship. The weight of her words settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. Every delegate present was beginning to understand that they had been interacting with what amounted to a carefully constructed facade, a deliberate presentation of humanity at its most civilized and restrained. Chancellor Mordeth's form stabilized as he processed this information. And now? Why reveal this to us now? Chen's expression grew serious, all traces of her earlier amusement fading away. Because, honored Chancellor, The galaxy is about to face a threat that cooperation and committee meetings won't solve. Something is coming that will require humanity to stop pretending to be civilized. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop again as the implications of her statement sank in. What kind of threat? Zethkar asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Chen's smile returned, but this time it was the smile of a predator that had just caught the scent of prey. The kind that requires monsters to fight monsters. The kind that needs humanity to remember what we were before we decided to be better. The emergency klaxons that filled the council chamber 3 hours later confirmed Ambassador Chen's ominous warning in the most dramatic way possible. As delegates scrambled to access their personal communication devices, Chen stood calmly in the center of the chaos, her expression suggesting she had been expecting this exact interruption. High Chancellor, Mordeth's ethereal form blazed with urgent light patterns as he accessed the incoming reports through his neural interface. "Impossible," he whispered, then louder. "This cannot be accurate." "What's happening?" demanded War Leader Thakmor, his massive Gorlax frame shifting into a combat stance that hadn't been seen in the council chambers for over 1,000 years. "Our deep space monitoring stations," the Chancellor's voice carried harmonics of disbelief. "They're detecting massive energy signatures at the galactic rim. Unknown vessel configurations numbering in the millions. They're moving toward the core worlds at velocities that should be impossible." Chen stepped forward, her previous diplomatic demeanor completely abandoned. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made even the Chancellor pause. "Chancellor, with your permission, I need to contact Earth immediately. Our long-range sensors detected these signatures 6 months ago." 6 months. Zethkar's scales rippled with shock. "You've known about this threat for 6 months and said nothing?" "We said nothing because we needed to be absolutely certain of what we were dealing with," Chen replied, activating a communication device that looked nothing like the primitive human technology the Council had observed before. The device projected a holographic interface that displayed scanning data and tactical information, with a sophistication that rivaled the Council's most advanced systems. "Terra Command. This is Ambassador Chen. Priority Alpha Authentication. The Council needs to see the Voidwalker files. All of them." The response came immediately, and the voice that answered carried the same unsettling confidence that Chen displayed. "Authentication confirmed, Ambassador. Uploading complete analysis now. Advisory. Recommend immediate transition to War Protocol 7. Acknowledged, Command. Transitioning to full disclosure mode." Chen turned back to the assembled delegates, and something fundamental had changed in her bearing. Gone was the diplomatic ambassador who had carefully maintained galactic protocols for 2 centuries. In her place stood something that looked human, but moved with the controlled violence of an apex predator that had suddenly found itself in its natural hunting ground. "Delegates, meet the real threat that's heading toward us," she said, as holographic displays filled the chamber with images that defied comprehension. The ships that appeared in the projections were wrong in every way that mattered. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating holes in space that hurt to look at directly. Their configurations followed no known design principles, as if they had been built by minds that understood physics differently than the rest of the galaxy. "We call them Voidwalkers," Chen explained, her tone now clinical and precise. "They appeared in our deep space monitoring networks 8 months ago, emerging from what we initially thought was empty intergalactic space. Our analysis suggests they're not from this galaxy." Representative Vorth's crystalline structure was flickering rapidly with stress patterns. "Extragalactic visitors? Why haven't they attempted communication? All spacefaring species establish contact protocols." Chen's expression grew grim. "Because they're not visitors, Representative. They're something else entirely. Our xenobiology teams have analyzed the debris from their scout ships. There are no life support systems, no habitation areas, no indication that these vessels are designed to support biological life as we understand it." "Automated ships?" suggested Zethkar hopefully. "No, something worse." Chen manipulated her controls, and the display zoomed in on the internal structure of one of the alien vessels. "These ships are grown, not built. The hull material is partially organic, partially synthetic, and partially something that our scientists can't classify. It's as if someone took the concept of a starship and filtered it through a nightmare." War Leader Thakmor studied the images with the eye of a professional soldier. "What are their capabilities? Weapons, shields, propulsion?" That's where things get truly terrifying, Chen replied. Their propulsion systems don't use any form of energy we can detect. They simply move. No exhaust signatures, no gravitational distortions, no subspace emissions. They alter their velocity and direction without any observable means of doing so. She switched to weapon analysis data. Their offensive capabilities are similarly incomprehensible. They don't fire projectiles or energy beams. Instead, they seem to edit reality in localized areas. Our scouts observed them attacking an asteroid field for testing purposes. They didn't destroy the asteroids. The asteroid simply stopped existing. No debris, no energy release, no trace that they had ever been there. The chamber fell silent except for the ambient sounds of life, support systems and the nervous, biological processes of various species trying to comprehend what they were hearing. Chancellor Mordeth's form had dimmed considerably. How many ships are we facing? Current count is approximately 12 million vessels, Chen replied matter-of-factly, and that number has been growing steadily. They appear to be manufacturing new ships using matter they harvest from empty space. 12 million, Thakmor repeated slowly. The combined fleets of all Council species total less than 300,000 vessels. Which brings us to why humanity chose this moment to reveal our true nature, Chen said, her tactical display shifting. To show human fleet compositions that none of the delegates had ever seen before. The ships that appeared on screen bore no resemblance to the peaceful exploration and research vessels that humanity had shared with the galaxy. These were clearly warships, designed with an aggressive functionality that spoke to their creators' deep understanding of violence. Our actual fleet strength is approximately 8 million combat vessels, Chen announced, causing several delegates to make sounds of shock. We've been building them in hidden shipyards throughout human space for the past 150 years. Impossible, breathed Vorth. We monitor all shipbuilding activities. The Council has observers in every major system. Chen's smile returned, but this time it was predatory and cold. Representative, you've been monitoring our civilian shipbuilding activities. Every human system has two sets of industrial facilities. The ones you can see and the ones you can't. She manipulated her controls again, revealing hidden installations throughout human space. Massive military shipyards concealed within asteroid fields, weapons testing facilities disguised as mining operations, and training academies that the Council had believed were agricultural research stations. We've been preparing for war for longer than most of your species have had spaceflight, Chen continued. Not war against you, but war against something exactly like this. We've always known that eventually we would encounter something that couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or befriended. Why? Asked Zethkar, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you assume such a thing? Chen turned to look at him directly, and he suddenly understood that he was looking into the eyes of a creature that had spent its entire evolutionary history as both predator and prey. Because, Ambassador Zethkar, in our experience, the universe is not a friendly place. Peace is an aberration. Cooperation is a luxury. And survival usually comes down to who can be more vicious than whatever is trying to kill them. She gestured toward the approaching alien fleet displayed in the hologram. The Voidwalkers represent everything we've been training to fight. They can't be reasoned with because they don't communicate. They can't be befriended because they seem to exist solely to consume. And they can't be stopped by conventional means because they operate outside the normal rules of physics. But they can be stopped? Chancellor Mordeth asked, a note of desperate hope in his translated voice. Chen's smile became genuinely warm for the first time since the alerts began. Oh yes, Chancellor. They can definitely be stopped. But stopping them is going to require us to become something the galaxy hasn't seen in 10,000 years. What's that? Thakmor asked, though his warrior's instincts were already providing the answer. Monsters, Chen replied simply. It's going to require us to remember that sometimes the only way to defeat evil is to become something even more frightening than the thing you're fighting. The transformation of human space began within hours of the Council's emergency session. As Ambassador Chen coordinated with Earth through her advanced communication systems, the delegates watched in horrified fascination as humanity shed too. Centuries of careful restraint like a snake, discarding old skin, Terra. Command reports all civilian populations are being relocated to hardened facilities, Chen announced, reading from displays that updated in real time. Military production has increased to wartime levels. All reserve fleets are being activated. Reserve fleets? Representative Vorth's crystalline form pulsed with confused patterns. You said your fleet consisted of 8 million vessels. Chen looked up from her displays, and her expression carried a mixture of apology and anticipation that unsettled everyone present. That's our active fleet, Representative. Our reserve consists of approximately 20 million additional vessels that we've kept in storage. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow. Zethkar felt his secondary heart skip several beats as he processed the implications. 28 million warships? You've built 28 million warships in secret? We've had a lot of time and a lot of motivation, Chen replied simply. When your species spends most of its evolutionary history fighting itself, you develop certain habits. One of those habits is building more weapons than you think you'll ever need, then building twice that number just to be safe. High Chancellor Mordeth's ethereal form flickered with distress patterns. The resource allocation alone should have been detectable. The energy requirements, the raw materials, the manufacturing infrastructure necessary for such an undertaking would be impossible for any other species, Chen agreed. But you're forgetting that humans evolved on a death world. We've become very efficient at extracting resources from environments that other species would consider completely barren. Every human colony world is essentially a mining and manufacturing facility, disguised as a civilian settlement. She activated another display showing cross-sections of human colony worlds. What the Council had believed were simple cities and agricultural areas were revealed to be multi-layered complexes that extended deep underground. Mining operations, manufacturing facilities, and military installations hidden beneath the surface installations that visiting Council observers had been shown. Our children grow up learning to build weapons and defensive systems the same way other species. Children learn mathematics, Chen continued. It's not cruelty or militarism. It's simply practical education for life in a universe that's constantly trying to kill you. War leader Thakmor, whose species prided itself on military prowess, stared at the displays with something approaching awe. These are not just warships. These are siege engines, planet killers. Some of these designs could crack worlds. All of these designs could crack worlds, Chen corrected. That's rather the point. When you're facing an enemy that operates outside normal physics and can simply delete matter from existence, conventional weapons become inadequate very quickly. She zoomed in on one particular ship design that looked like it had been conceived in a fever dream of destruction. The vessel was massive, bristling with weapon systems that defied easy categorization, and surrounded by what appeared to be a field of distorted spacetime. This is a nightmare-class dreadnought, Chen explained with obvious pride. It mounts 17 different reality manipulation weapons, defensive systems that can phase the entire ship out of normal space-time, and offensive capabilities that we're still discovering. We've built about 3,000 of them. Reality manipulation? Zethkar's voice cracked as he spoke. You've developed weapons that manipulate reality? We had to, Chen replied matter-of-factly. When you're preparing to fight enemies who can edit matter out of existence, you need weapons that can fight on the same level. So we learned to edit reality right back. The implications were staggering. The galaxy had operated for millennia under the assumption that certain physical laws were absolute and unchangeable. The idea that any species could develop technology that violated these fundamental principles was beyond most delegates' ability to comprehend. How is such a thing possible? Representative Vorth asked, his crystalline structure now dimming with what appeared to be existential despair. Chen's expression softened slightly, as if she recognized the psychological impact her revelations were having on the assembled delegates. Representative, your species has spent the last 12,000 years living in a peaceful, stable galaxy, where the greatest challenges involved resource distribution and territorial disputes. You've had the luxury of developing philosophy, art, and pure science without the pressure of constant existential threats. She gestured toward the displays showing human military technology. Humans have never had that luxury. Even during our most peaceful periods, we were always preparing for the next war, the next plague, the next catastrophe that would threaten our survival. That constant pressure forced us to push the boundaries of what's possible. You speak of pressure, Chancellor Mordeth interjected, but surely scientific advancement comes from cooperation and shared knowledge, not from conflict and desperation. Chen's smile returned, but this time it carried a hint of sadness. Chancellor, that's a beautiful sentiment, and in an ideal universe you'd be absolutely correct. But humans don't come from an ideal universe. We come from a place where survival required us to become very good at killing things that were trying to kill us. She activated a new display that showed human scientific development over the past 2 centuries. Every major breakthrough we've achieved has been driven by military necessity. We developed faster-than-light communication because we needed to coordinate fleets across multiple star systems. We solved quantum entanglement manipulation because we needed instantaneous data transfer for targeting systems. We cracked reality manipulation because we needed weapons that could function outside normal physics. But what about your medical advances? Asked Zethkar desperately. Surely those came from humanitarian motivations. Our medical technology exists because we needed to keep soldiers alive in environments that would kill most galactic species, Chen replied without hesitation. Our regenerative treatments were developed to repair combat injuries. Our disease resistance comes from deliberate exposure to biological weapons. Our surgical techniques were perfected on battlefield casualties. The chamber fell silent as the delegates absorbed this information. Everything they thought they knew about humanity's contributions to galactic civilization was being recontextualized in the most disturbing way possible. However, Chen continued, her tone becoming more encouraging, the important thing to understand is that we chose to use these capabilities for peaceful purposes. We could have conquered the galaxy centuries ago, but we didn't. We could have eliminated competing species, but we chose to cooperate with them instead. She stepped closer to the center of the chamber, and her presence somehow commanded attention from every delegate present. The humans you've known for the past 2 centuries represent our species at its absolute best. They are who we became when we decided to be better than our nature demanded. But now, facing the Void Walkers, we need to remember who we were before we made that choice. And who were you? Asked Thakmor, his warrior's instincts recognizing something fundamental in Chen's bearing. Chen's expression grew distant, as if she were looking back across centuries of carefully suppressed memories. We were the species that survived when everything else on our world didn't. We were the hunters who became so efficient that we ran out of prey and had to hunt each other. We were the survivors who looked at a hostile universe and decided that we would make it fear us instead of the other way around. She refocused on the assembled delegates, and her eyes carried a weight that made several of them step backward involuntarily. We were monsters, delegates. Beautiful, efficient, terrifying monsters who chose to become something better. But monsters nonetheless. And now? Whispered Representative Vorth. Chen's smile became predatory again, but this time it carried a promise rather than a threat. Now we're going to remind the universe why apex predators are called apex predators. The Void Walkers think they can simply delete matter from existence and consume whatever they find. They're about to discover what happens when they encounter something that deletes back. The first contact with the Void Walkers occurred exactly 18 hours after Ambassador Chen's revelation, when a Council deep space monitoring station simply vanished from all sensor networks. No distress signal, no debris field, no trace that it had ever existed except for the sudden absence of its regular communication signals. Station Epsilon 7 has gone dark, reported Communications Officer Zenthal, his tentacles trembling as he processed the readings. All contact lost at 1427 Galactic Standard Time. Chen, who had remained in the council chamber to coordinate the response, showed no surprise at the news. That's approximately where our projections suggested first contact would occur. How many personnel were stationed there? 47 beings from 6 different species. Chancellor Mordeth replied, his ethereal form flickering with grief patterns. All families have been notified of their loss. Chancellor, with respect, you may want to delay those notifications, Chen suggested, manipulating her tactical displays to show the sector where the station had disappeared. We've learned not to assume death until we understand what we're dealing with. The massive Gorlax war leader shifted forward, his combat instincts fully engaged. You suspect they might be alive? We suspect the Void Walkers don't operate according to normal physics, Chen replied, highlighting energy readings from the area. Our long-range sensors are detecting some very unusual signatures from that location. The matter hasn't been destroyed, it's been relocated. Representative Vorth's crystalline structure pulsed with confusion patterns. Relocated? To where? That's what we're about to find out, Chen said, activating her communication system. Terra Command, this is Ambassador Chen. Request immediate deployment of Reconnaissance Package Alpha to coordinates Delta 77. Acknowledged, Ambassador. Package Alpha is en route. Estimated arrival in 47 minutes. Zethkar's scales rippled with nervous energy. What exactly is Reconnaissance Package Alpha? Chen's expression grew serious. Something we hoped we'd never have to use in the presence of Allied forces. You're about to see humanity's first generation of reality manipulation technology in action. The wait that followed was filled with tense silence as the delegates processed everything they had learned. The comfortable universe they had known for millennia was crumbling around them, replaced by something far more dangerous and incomprehensible. When the reconnaissance data began streaming in, even Chen's composed demeanor showed cracks of concern. The readings that appeared on her displays defied rational interpretation. The monitoring station hasn't been destroyed, she announced, her voice carrying a note of disturbed fascination. It's been moved into a parallel dimensional space that overlaps with our reality, but exists slightly outside normal physics. Is that even possible? Asked Zenthal, his communication equipment struggling to process the concept. Apparently, Chen replied grimly.
And according to our analysis, the station's personnel are still alive.
They're existing in a state that our scientists are calling quantum suspension. Their biological processes have been slowed to near zero, but they're still technically alive. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. The Void Walkers weren't simply destroying everything they encountered. They were collecting it, storing it in some kind of extra-dimensional space for unknown purposes. Why would they keep living beings? Asked Chancellor Mordeth. Chen's tactical displays shifted to show analysis patterns that looked more like medical scans than military intelligence. Our xenobiology teams have been studying the question since we first encountered Voidwalker technology. Based on the energy patterns we're detecting, we believe they're studying us. Studying us how? Thakmor's voice carried the controlled aggression of a warrior who sensed a threat he couldn't properly identify. They appear to be analyzing the biological and psychological patterns of different species, Chen explained, manipulating her displays to show complex data streams. Think of it as the most advanced dissection in history, except the subjects remain alive and conscious throughout the process. The chamber erupted in shocked vocalizations from multiple species. The concept of being kept alive for study by entities that operated outside normal physics represented a form of horror that transcended cultural boundaries. How long can the station personnel survive in that state? Representative Vorth asked, his crystalline form now flickering with rapid distress patterns. Indefinitely, Chen replied, and the simple certainty in her voice made the situation even more terrifying. Time moves differently in that dimensional space. From their perspective, only minutes have passed since the station disappeared. From our perspective, they could remain in that state for centuries. Then we have to rescue them, declared Chancellor Mordeth, his ethereal form blazing with determination. Chen nodded, but her expression suggested the solution would not be simple. Rescue is possible, but it requires technology that operates on the same level as the Voidwalker's systems. Standard physics won't work in that dimensional space. She activated a new display showing human ships that looked unlike anything the delegates had seen before. These vessels seemed to exist in a state of constant flux, their hull patterns shifting and changing as if they were partially phased out of normal reality. Meet the Phantom Fleet, Chen announced. 50 vessels equipped with dimensional phase technology that allows them to operate in the same space as the Voidwalkers. They can enter the parallel dimension, extract the station and its personnel, and return to normal space. When do they launch? Asked Thakmor, his warrior's impatience evident. They launched 6 hours ago, Chen replied, causing several delegates to make sounds of surprise. We've learned that when dealing with extra-dimensional threats, preparation time is more valuable than reaction time. As if summoned by her words, Chen's communication system activated with an incoming transmission. Ambassador, this is Commander Sarah Chen of the HSS Reality Knife. We have successfully entered the target dimensional space and located the missing station. Acknowledged, Commander. What's the situation? The station is intact. All personnel are alive but in quantum suspension as predicted. However, we've discovered something else. The Voidwalkers have been collecting more than just our recent monitoring station. Chen's expression darkened. Explain. Ma'am, there are approximately 12,000 structures in this dimensional space. Ships, stations and what appear to be entire city-sized installations from dozens of different civilizations. Some of these designs are completely unknown to our databases. The implications hit the chamber like a meteor strike. The Voidwalkers hadn't just recently arrived in the galaxy. They had been operating for an unknown period, collecting specimens and installations from civilizations that the Council had never encountered. Commander, can you determine how long these collections have been accumulating? Negative on precise dating, but some of these structures show design principles that suggest they're thousands of years old. Maybe tens of thousands. Chancellor Mordeth's form had dimmed to barely visible levels. They've been harvesting civilizations for millennia. It appears so, Chen confirmed. And based on the scale of what Commander Chen is reporting, the 47 beings from Station Epsilon 7 represent a tiny fraction of the total number of consciousness currently held in quantum suspension. Representative, Vorth's crystalline structure was now pulsing with rapid, panicked patterns. How many beings are we talking about? Chen consulted her displays, her expression growing more grim with each passing second. Commander, can you estimate the total number of suspended consciousness? Rough calculation based on the structures we can scan. Approximately 8 million beings from what appears to be over 200 different species. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 8 million consciousness trapped in extra-dimensional space, kept alive for study by entities that operated outside normal reality. We have to save them, Zethkar whispered. But his voice carried no conviction that such a thing was possible. Chen turned to face the assembled delegates, and her expression had transformed completely. Gone was any trace of the diplomatic ambassador who had spent 2 centuries carefully maintaining galactic protocols. In her place stood something that looked human, but carried itself with the cold calculation of an apex predator that had just identified its prey. We will save them, she said, and her voice carried absolute certainty. All of them. But saving them is only the beginning. What do you mean? Asked Thakmor. Chen's smile returned, but this time it was the smile of something that had spent its entire evolutionary history being more dangerous than anything else in its environment. I mean that the Voidwalkers have just made the mistake that every predator species eventually makes. They've attacked something that's more vicious than they are. She activated her communication system again. Terra Command, this is Ambassador Chen. Message to all fleet commanders. Operation Nightmare is authorized. Repeat, Operation Nightmare is authorized. It's time to show these things what happens when you hunt humanity. The Battle of the Void began 12 hours later, when the full might of humanity's hidden fleet engaged the Voidwalker Armada in a region of space that had been empty until both forces arrived. What followed defied every tactical doctrine the galaxy had developed over 10 millennia of civilized warfare. From the council chambers, the delegates watched through real-time feeds as 28 million human warships materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation, surrounding the Voidwalker fleet in a 3-dimensional sphere of concentrated firepower. But what truly shocked the observers was the space between the opposing forces. Reality itself was wrong there. Visual sensors are having difficulty processing the combat zone, reported Communications Officer Zenthal, his tentacles trembling as he attempted to interpret the readings. The space between the fleets appears to be shifting. Ambassador Chen monitored the battle through her advanced communication systems, her expression focused with the intensity of a predator tracking prey. The Voidwalkers are attempting to edit our ships out of existence, she explained to the horrified delegates. Our reality anchors are preventing them from completing the process. Reality anchors? Representative Vorth's crystalline form was flickering with patterns of disbelief. Devices that lock our ships into normal physics, Chen replied without taking her attention from the tactical displays. When something tries to delete matter from existence, the anchors create a stabilization field that forces reality to remember what should be there. On the main display, they could see the results of this cosmic struggle. Voidwalker ships would target human vessels, and for a moment the targeted ship would begin to fade from existence. Then the reality anchors would activate, and the ship would snap back into full visibility, often appearing to be completely unaffected by what should have been total annihilation. How is this possible? Whispered High Chancellor Mordeth, his ethereal form barely visible with shock. Because humans have been fighting each other for so long that we've learned to weaponize everything, Chen answered, her tone carrying a mixture of pride and regret. including the fundamental forces that hold reality together. The battle's scope became clear as the human fleet began its assault. These were not the careful, measured exchanges that characterized civilized warfare. This was something primal and terrifying, conducted with weapons that should not have been possible. Human ships fired beams that seemed to tear holes in space itself, creating temporary voids that sucked Voidwalker vessels into dimensions that existed outside normal physics. Other weapons appeared to accelerate time around their targets, aging enemy ships into component atoms in seconds. Still others seemed to reverse causality itself, causing Voidwalker attacks to damage their own vessels instead of their intended targets. "What are we watching?" asked War Leader Thakmor, his warriors' training struggling to categorize the chaos before them. "You're watching what happens when a species that evolved as apex predators decides to stop pretending to be civilized," Chen replied. Her tactical displays showed human fleet movements that followed no conventional strategy, instead resembling the coordinated hunting patterns of pack predators surrounding wounded prey. The Voidwalkers, for their part, seemed genuinely surprised by the human response. Their initial attempts to simply delete human ships from existence had failed, and their follow-up tactics suggested confusion rather than strategic planning. "They're not adapting," observed Zethkar, his scales rippling with nervous energy. "Why aren't they adapting their tactics?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful as she studied the enemy response patterns. "Because they've never encountered resistance before. Every other species they've harvested has operated within normal physics. They've never faced an enemy that could fight back using the same rule-breaking technology they use." As the battle progressed, the true horror of human military doctrine became apparent. The human fleet wasn't simply trying to destroy the Voidwalker ships. They were systematically capturing them, using weapons that disabled rather than destroyed, trapping enemy vessels in stasis fields that prevented escape while keeping them intact for study. "You're taking prisoners?" Representative Vorth asked, his confusion evident in his rapid light patterns. "We're acquiring research material," Chen corrected. "Every Voidwalker ship we capture brings us closer to understanding their technology, their origins, and their ultimate purpose." The efficiency with which the human fleet accomplished this was terrifying to observe. Squads of specialized vessels would isolate individual Voidwalker ships, disable their exotic propulsion and defensive systems, then transport them to massive collection vessels that seemed purpose-built for containing dangerous extra-dimensional technology. "How long have you been planning this specific battle?" asked Chancellor Mordeth, his voice carrying overtones of awe and horror. "We've been developing anti-Voidwalker tactics for 3 months, Chen replied, "ever since our deep space sensors detected their approach. But the underlying strategies are based on combat doctrines we've been refining for centuries." "Combat doctrines for fighting what?" Thakmor demanded. Chen turned to look at him directly, and her expression carried the weight of species-wide trauma. "For fighting ourselves, War Leader. Every tactic we're using against the Voidwalkers was originally developed for fighting other humans. We've been so good at killing each other that when we finally encountered something else that needed killing, the transition was seamless. The battle reached its climax when the human flagship, a vessel so massive it distorted local space-time with its presence, activated what Chen described as a reality cascade weapon. The result was beyond the delegates' ability to comprehend. A sphere of altered physics expanded from the flagship, encompassing the entire battle zone. Within that sphere, the laws of cause and effect seemed to operate according to human preferences rather than universal constants. Voidwalker ships that attempted to retreat found themselves moving toward human vessels instead. Enemy weapons that fired at human targets struck their own forces. The very concept of Voidwalker tactical advantage seemed to cease existing within the altered space. "What have you done?" gasped Representative Vorth, his crystalline structure now emitting distress patterns so rapid they appeared as solid light. "We've imposed human logic on local reality," Chen explained calmly. "Within that field, the universe operates according to rules that make sense to human military thinking. The Voidwalkers' exotic abilities are still functional, but they now work in ways that benefit us instead of them." The battle ended not with the destruction of the Voidwalker fleet, but with its complete capture. 28 million human vessels surrounded and contained 12 million alien ships, all without losing a single human vessel to enemy action. "Impossible," whispered Chancellor Mordeth. "No one achieves victory without casualties. It violates every principle of warfare." Chen's smile returned, carrying the satisfaction of a predator that had successfully defended its territory. Chancellor, you're thinking like a civilized species that fights wars to resolve political disputes. We're not fighting a war. We're conducting an extermination operation against a pest species that made the mistake of threatening our territory. She activated her communication system. All fleet commanders, this is Ambassador Chen. Begin Phase 2. Time to collect our people and find out what these things were really after. As the delegates watched, human ships began entering the same dimensional space where the Voidwalkers had been storing their collected specimens. The rescue operation that followed was conducted with the same efficient brutality that had characterized the battle. How many consciousness are you retrieving? Asked Zethkar. Chen consulted her displays, and for the first time since the crisis began, her expression showed genuine emotion. All of them. 8 million beings from over 200 species, some of which have been in quantum suspension for thousands of years. And the Voidwalkers themselves? Chen's expression hardened again. Will be thoroughly studied to ensure they can never threaten anyone again. And then, depending on what we learn about their ultimate purpose, we'll decide whether they deserve to continue existing. The casual way she spoke of potential genocide sent chills through the chamber, but none of the delegates felt inclined to argue with the species that had just demonstrated they could rewrite the laws of physics to suit their tactical needs. What happens now? Asked War Leader Thakmor, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely certain he wanted to know the answer. Chen deactivated her communication systems and turned to face the assembled delegates. Her diplomatic bearing beginning to return but never quite covering the predatory awareness that had been revealed. Now, honored delegates, we return to the question of humanity's membership in the Galactic Council. But I suspect the conversation is going to be somewhat different than originally planned. 6 months after the Battle of the Void, the Galactic Council convened for what historians would later record as the most significant governmental restructuring in galactic history. The chamber looked the same, with its crystalline dome displaying the light of 1,000 member worlds. But everything else had fundamentally changed. Ambassador Chen stood in the center of the chamber, but she was no longer alone. Representatives from the rescued civilizations flanked her, beings from species that the current council had never encountered, some wearing environmental suits designed for atmospheric requirements that existing technology couldn't provide. The oldest among them carried themselves with the dignity of races that remembered the galaxy before the Great Peace. Honored Council, Chen began, her voice carrying the same diplomatic courtesy that had characterized her original presentation, but with an underlying authority that no one present chose to challenge. We gather today to formalize humanity's position within the galactic community, and to address the larger questions raised by recent events. High Chancellor Mordeth's ethereal form had stabilized since the crisis, but his light pattern still carried traces of the existential shock that had characterized the past months. Ambassador Chen, the Council has reviewed the complete records of your species' response to the Voidwalker threat. We owe humanity a debt that cannot be adequately expressed. You owe us nothing, Chancellor, Chen replied firmly. We acted to protect our own interests, which happened to align with the interests of every other living being in the galaxy. The fact that this benefited others was a pleasant side effect, not our primary motivation. Representative Vorth's crystalline structure pulsed with curiosity patterns. Then what was your primary motivation? Chen's expression grew serious, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of species-wide conviction. Survival, Representative. The Voidwalkers represented an existential threat to humanity. We responded accordingly. War Leader Thakmor shifted forward, his massive frame conveying respect rather than challenge. Your response saved 8 million beings from indefinite torture. How can you call that a side effect? Because, War Leader, if saving those beings had required sacrificing humanity, we wouldn't have done it, Chen answered without hesitation. We would have found another way, or we would have made the hard choice. Humanity does not sacrifice itself for others. We find solutions that let everyone survive. Or we ensure that we're the ones who do the surviving. The bluntness of her statement sent ripples of discomfort through the assembled delegates. But none of them could argue with the results. The rescued civilization stood as living proof that humanity's self-interested approach had achieved better outcomes than millennia of civilized cooperation. One of the rescued representatives stepped forward, a being whose species the Council had never encountered. Their translator rendered their words in harmonics that spoke of ancient wisdom and hard-earned experience. "I am first speaker Kethvar of the Eternal Archive Collective," they announced. "My people were among the first to be harvested by the Voidwalkers, approximately 15,000 years ago. We have observed their operations from quantum suspension for longer than most current civilizations have existed." Chancellor Mordeth's form flickered with shock patterns. 15,000 years? The implications for historical records alone are staggering, Kethvar agreed. But that is not why I speak today. I speak to address a question that I know troubles this council. You wonder whether humanity's approach to galactic citizenship is compatible with the peace you have maintained for 10 millennia. The chamber fell silent as every delegate focused on the ancient being's words. "The answer," Kethvar continued, "is that your peace was maintained because nothing challenged it. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is what happens when all potential conflicts are resolved before they become actual conflicts. For 10,000 years, your council has succeeded in this because you faced no true threats." They gestured toward Chen, who stood listening with the same attentive respect she had shown throughout the proceedings. "Humanity represents something your civilization has never encountered. A species that has never known true peace but has learned to create stability through strength. They are not peaceful. They are victorious." Representative Vorth's light patterns carried confusion. "What is the difference?" "Peaceful species avoid conflict through negotiation and compromise," Chen answered. "Victorious species avoid conflict by being too dangerous to attack. Both approaches can result in stability, but they require fundamentally different mindsets." She activated a holographic display showing the current state of human space. Where once there had been hidden military installations and secret fleets, now there were openly displayed defensive networks that spanned multiple star systems. "Humanity offers the Galactic Council a choice," Chen announced. "You can continue to maintain peace through cooperation and goodwill, hoping that nothing like the Voidwalkers ever appears again. Or you can maintain peace through the knowledge that anyone who threatens galactic stability will face immediate and overwhelming retaliation. You're proposing that humanity become the galaxy's military force?" asked Zeth Kar, his scales rippling with nervous energy. "We're proposing that humanity become the galaxy's deterrent," Chen clarified. "Every species in this chamber has seen what we're capable of when properly motivated. Every potential threat that might consider attacking galactic civilization will know the same thing. Sometimes the best way to maintain peace is to be absolutely certain that breaking it would be catastrophically expensive." Chancellor Mordeth's form brightened as he processed the implications. "You're offering to be our guardians?" "We're offering to be ourselves," Chen replied. "Openly, honestly, and without pretense. We will continue to contribute to galactic civilization through technology, medicine, and engineering, but we will also serve as the response to any threat that cannot be resolved through traditional diplomatic means." The ancient first speaker Kethvar stepped forward again. "Honored Council, my people observed the Voidwalkers' operations for 15 millennia. We watched them harvest hundreds of civilizations, each one believing that reason and cooperation would somehow protect them from unreasonable forces." Their translator rendered tones of deep sadness and hard-learned wisdom. "No civilization we observed survived contact with the Voidwalkers through diplomatic means. They survived when someone else fought the Voidwalkers and won. Humanity is the first species we have encountered that was willing and able to fight monsters on their own terms and emerge victorious." War leader Thakmor, whose people had the longest military tradition in the current council, spoke with the authority of a professional warrior. "The Gorlax Confederation formally endorses humanity's proposal. We understand the difference between those who fight because they must and those who fight because they excel at it. Humanity belongs in the second category. But what about checks and balances?" Representative Vorth asked, his crystalline structure pulsing with concerned patterns. "What prevents humanity from deciding that other species represent threats that need to be eliminated?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of careful consideration. "Representative, that's an excellent question, and it deserves an honest answer. Nothing prevents humanity from making that decision except our own self-interest." The bluntness of her response caused several delegates to make sounds of alarm, but she continued before anyone could interrupt. "However, Our self-interest is served by maintaining a galaxy full of diverse, thriving civilizations. We benefit from galactic trade, cultural exchange, and the different perspectives that other species provide. Destroying other civilizations would make us poorer, not richer. She gestured toward the rescued representatives. More importantly, we've now seen what the galaxy looks like when someone decides that other species are expendable. The Void Walkers reduced hundreds of civilizations to research specimens. We found that prospect so unacceptable that we were willing to risk our own species to prevent it. Chancellor Mordath's form stabilized as he reached a decision. The Council will vote on humanity's revised membership proposal. All in favor of accepting humanity as a full member with special status as Galactic Guardians? The vote was unanimous. As the ceremonial lights flickered throughout the chamber, signifying humanity's formal acceptance into the Galactic Council, Chen allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Not the diplomatic smile she had worn for 2 centuries, but the genuine expression of a predator that had successfully claimed its territory. "Thank you, honored delegates," she said, her voice carrying notes of both gratitude and promise. "Humanity looks forward to a long and prosperous relationship with all Council species, and to any potential threats that might be listening to these proceedings. We look forward to demonstrating why threatening galactic peace is no longer a viable strategy." In the months that followed, the galaxy settled into a new equilibrium. Trade flourished, scientific cooperation expanded, and cultural exchange reached levels not seen since the earliest days of galactic civilization. But through